We have on the show today the man, the myth, the legend himself, Ruminate. Thank you guys for being here. It is, what day is it? Honestly, what
Tuesday.
day is it? Tuesday. So
what's up, people?
Yeah, okay. So Ruminate is on the show with me, and to give context, I had that debate with Vosh, as many of you guys I'm sure are aware, and I confronted him about his belief that progressives should be not only preparing but using the rhetoric of a violent clash on the horizon being a reason to arm up. And I felt the way in which he talked about some of these things, saying that Republicans wanted to kill all minorities and they just want us to suffer, and la-di-la-di-la. While I agree the Republican Party is very dangerous and very bad in many ways, that type of rhetoric is actually expediting some sort of violent clash between the left and right, and I think we should be trying to build a progressive movement that is peaceful. And then I had Ruminate reach out through Twitter saying he disagreed and wanted to kind of give some takes on my beliefs on this. And then also, I didn't connect the dots, but he called into the David Pakman show and asked David Pakman about this very topic. So Ruminate, if you want to introduce yourself, plug anything up front before we get into the discussion, go for it, and then just kind of give your basic thesis for why you feel I should be confronted.
Sure, yeah. Well, first, thanks for having me, man. I was introduced to you through the David Pakman channel because I follow him and Vosh and Destiny and Econoboy and all the others. And I thought you did great work. Like, Jordan Klepper would be very proud of the correspondence work you did in Austin. So I'm Ruminate. I am definitely a latecomer to the online political sphere. I was introduced to it during the pandemic, to Pakman and Brian Tyler Cohen, Destiny Vosh, etc. And as the pandemic went on, I decided, you know what, I have some free time, some disposable income, so I invested in like equipment and shit to try to dabble into it myself, dip my toes in the water. I found my strongest following so far on TikTok. I don't want to brag, but I have reached 7,500 followers just today. So it's very small, but I'm working to try to develop some sort of following. I'm a progressive in aspiration, so I definitely want the United States to be left of where it is in terms of just general policy, certainly on things like climate change. But I am a Democrat by pragmatism, and I would say that my philosophy in general is just harm reduction. We have a choice between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and so I am Democrat all the way, vote blue no matter who. Like, even Manchin, as much as he infuriates me, he's our best bet in West Virginia. So, like, I'm a Democrat simp just to get the Republicans out of power. So, again, you can find me on TikTok. You can find me on YouTube and Twitch and stuff like that. But the dust is certainly collected on those. So you can find me mostly on Twitter and TikTok. So
awesome. Me. And then give me the lowdown of what you took issue with my debate with Vosh. Oh, and what's your TikTok username?
I believe it's just @Ruminate.
Awesome, and people can see on screen. Me curious. What the is, how do you spell that? But now you can give RUM1N8. Yeah, that's the username. Perfect.
So yeah, as far as your conversation with Vosh, there was a bit, and I actually wanted to refer to the tweets themselves while I was thinking about it. So it's actually kind of the culmination of some conversations that I've been having with quite a few people. I guess I am triggered by what I see as certain enlightened centrist tropes, and even when they don't come from an enlightened centrist. So, I've been having conversations with people, friends of mine who are here in the States, online, offline, friends in Europe and whatnot, who definitely see the threat posed by the Republican Party, but adhere to this kind of what I would consider like an antiquated notion of civility and civility politics and bipartisanship and whatnot. And so as time has gone on and the Republican Party has become more, as I would say, more obstructionist even than they were during the Obama presidency, which was more obstructionist than they were under the Clinton presidency, and Newt Gingrich was the leader of the Republican Party. I've gotten really frustrated, and because I also think that we're reaching an inflection point. And so when frustrations threaten to boil over and you don't think that you're making much progress, and we've tried civility politics for decades, and Biden himself, I would say President Biden is the embodiment of civility politics and moderate rhetoric and bipartisanship, and I don't think it's paying off for him at all. When I hear anybody kind of allude to that's kind of the way we need to approach things, I'm inclined to disagree. And so with your conversation with Vosh in particular, it's not that I didn't take issue with some of the alarmist rhetoric that Vosh was saying, like, I'm not a gun owner. And so the idea of, telling people to go out and get guns, I personally wouldn't do it, but I understand the logic behind it. And so when you were effectively, from my perspective, saying, hey, cool the engines, pump the brakes, I disagreed strongly with just the overall sentiment. It's not that I think you're centrist. I take you at face value that you're progressive, but it's just more I don't think it's Vosh and people like him that need to be cooled. I think extremists, or I shouldn't say extremists, but radicals like Vosh need to be weaponized. Sorry. Go ahead.
I wanted to just give you the space to lay it out, but now I'll let you know what I take issue with that initial statement. So if you think about rhetoric, okay, you're always trying to find where the line should be, where ideally we all should be standing as far as rhetoric goes, and politics is a super rhetorical game. And so you can't just say, I believe we need to go in one direction, because I think the biggest problem is most of America is too moderated in their perception of how dire the situation is. Because if someone's so far past the ideal line, they also need to be reeled in. And the biggest point that I was making, and I want to say this so clearly up front, because clearly you and other people misunderstood this. I don't believe in civility politics. I don't think people know what civility politics means. Civility politics doesn't mean being against violent rhetoric. And everyone can gaslight the living poop out of me and pretend like Vosh wasn't heavily encouraging people to proactively act violent. He said the words correctly multiple times throughout the stream for plausible deniability, where he said, hey, all I'm saying is people should get a gun to defend themselves. And I said, absolutely fine. People can get a gun if they go through the legal processes, and if they want to think about self-defense, that's totally fine. What I had an issue with is when he would say, for example, I don't think it would have been wrong in Nazi Germany to, at the same place that we're in America, take out Nazi leadership. But he wouldn't make the comparison to America and say, so that's what I'm saying. I'm saying we should take out Republican. Like, that's crazy talk. And that's what he was talking about. And then he said, I want people to be taking shots out of apartment windows at Proud Boys driving around in trucks. What? And then he said, I'm great with a few bricks being thrown. So, we should start violent riots. That is very different. Being against that is very different than being like, we should all be civil and never call out Republicans. I think the Republican Party is incredibly dangerous, but the way we're going to fight them is a peaceful progressive coalition, because any way that creeps into violent rhetoric is going to scare away every single liberal, and definitely anyone who considers themselves centrist, and obviously any conservatives. And so the mischaracterization of my position by a lot of people that, oh, I just want us to all be centrists and chill and, not talk about how dangerous the Republican Party is super upsetting. And I think pretending like, hey, we need some people to go a little bit more aggressive, so that means we can go as aggressive as we want. No, you're going to scare away the people that you want to take over to a more aggressive stance by going so aggressive that you're talking about violence.
So in a minute, I'm going to ask you for an example, like a textbook example of like the kind of rhetoric that you would find acceptable. Like I'm going to ask you to describe the Republican Party in a way that you think is both accurate and electorally viable in just a second. But to clarify, are you saying that you oppose violent rhetoric or offensively violent rhetoric? Like if Vosh had, like you were kind of mixed there, I want to be clear. Is it you oppose any violent rhetoric, anything that suggests any sort of physical altercation, or anything that could be construed as us starting it?
In principle, if I was in a private room with two people, I would be fine talking about forms of violence that are defensive and being very clear that we're against offensive violence. But two things. First of all, putting any focus on a violent clash is sending the message that the means in which we have to prevent any clash like that in the future are pretty much, we should give up on them. Democracy's already practically failed. Get ready for violence. And also, he was so clearly saying offensive violence because he thinks Republicans are already, like, he made the point so many times that they've already started violence. So we got to respond. And so he is calling for offensive violence under the umbrella of pretending that it's defensive.
So a couple. Okay, number one, I appreciate the clarity, but again, kind of to narrow it down just a bit more, you said in a private room, in a private conversation,
I forgot to sum up that point. I was going to say that in a private room, you can be a little bit more loose with your language because you know the person you're talking to has the same values as you. When you're on a massive platform, any focus on violence, you have to take into consideration that it may have an effect. So you may call it defensive, but if you describe all the violence Republicans are doing, we have to take action, get your guns. Even if you technically characterize it as defensive, it can lead to very harmful actions by your followers. So I think a private conversation in a room can be a little different than on a platform where you need to be more mindful of invoking violence as a talking point.
That's perfectly reasonable. I'm gonna try to narrow it down even further just so I have a complete understanding of like each particular point. So I agree that public speech and private speech operate under, I would say, different moral thresholds in the sense that you can be more candid, more, engage in more hyperbole, vent, such as it were. And then in public speech, for a variety of reasons, because your words can carry more influence, more people are hearing them, people not necessarily with whom you have deep, close personal friendships, that you have to be more responsible with public speech than private. I completely agree. I think as a general rule, that applies to everybody, people with major platforms and people with smaller platforms. In this particular instance, my question is, does that difference owe to any sort of moral is it you would avoid publicly speaking about defensive violence the way you'd be willing to in private because you think it's morally wrong, or because you think it would be poor strategy, like it would be weaponized by the opposition as you advocating for violence? Or is it a third thing, which is you're worried that the people to whom you're speaking would not recognize the distinction between offensive and defensive violence and overreact with violence? Like, which of the three is it? It's morally different. You're worried about how it would be perceived by your enemies. Or number three, you're worried the audience to whom you speak would not recognize the distinction you're trying to make.
So those are all one and the same, because it would be morally bad to talk about something if you knew that it would cause people to take offensive violence because they took it the wrong way. But I think morally, taking it away from Vosh for a second, in a vacuum, actually talking about defensive violence is totally reasonable morally all the time and isn't even harmful to any movement. part of what I have an issue with is Vosh not just saying, taking it back to Vosh, just guys, I know we're in scary times. While I don't want it to ever come to this, if there ever was some sort of violent clash, I just want you guys to be aware of, how you would defend yourself, and just maybe think about getting a firearm and getting to know your community just in case anything happened. But let's get back to how we're going to build a progressive movement to stop them democratically. If that was all of it, I literally wouldn't have even taken note and never would have reached out to him. It was, number one, hyperbolically characterizing some of the things that have or have not happened or are going to happen in America. And two, using that hyperbolic description to justify language that was not defensive. And after watching the debate multiple times, and even on stream, we all had a realization where it was like, oh, wait, he was 100% saying all the way up to, yes, go kill politicians. And then laughing it off like, no, I'm just talking about Germany. So there's a few things there. To answer your question, I think all of the three that you laid out are one thing, because you had to consider all of them to know if it's moral. But then also, in the context of our conversation, he definitely wasn't just talking about defensive violence.
Yeah, so I think it's perfectly reasonable to cite those three things. I think they're different, but I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think that all three are legitimate concerns to why you would speak differently in public than in private. So I want to make sure that I am not misrepresenting you. So is it fair to say that Luke thinks it's morally okay to advocate for defensive violence, but doing so publicly creates considerable risks, how your words will be perceived by your enemies, and how your words would be perceived by intended allies who don't recognize the distinction? So that's two things. And then, which creates the third thing, that's morally bad. It's morally bad to give your enemies ammunition to use against you, pun intended, and to inadvertently misdirect potential allies who might be overzealous.
The reason why I can't give you a clear answer is this all depends on your definition of defensive violence. And so I think the one that you might be going off of, or Vosh would be going, people will then stretch the definition of violence to a place that I no longer would think it's moral. Now, if we're talking about what I consider to be like self-defense, then it's totally morally correct. I'm not worried about people taking it the wrong way if you actually are talking about real self-defense. But I think
that's
the definition of defensive violence has been stretched to violence could happen on you, or bad things have been done by a broad group of people that weren't violence but have led to negative outcomes that we could define as violence.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, look, behavior exists on a spectrum. If most human behavior was easily, demarcated, like this is a clear, hard line of this behavior, then 75% of human conflict, interpersonal or societal, wouldn't exist. So I think it's fair to say, look, defensive violence exists on a spectrum, right? And where I draw the particular, what I consider to be blue, somebody else might consider like, bluish green or whatnot. And so I take your point that you would probably define defensive violence differently than Vosh. I don't know about me per se, because I'm not committed to the same, hang on one sec.
I'm getting an energy drink.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, go for it.
Sorry about that. That's the guy who's coming to work on my AC, and I had to tell him I'm in a meeting. Call my roommate. So I respect that. I respect that you would define it differently from Vosh. I think that's pretty clear. I don't know, quite frankly, the exact parameters of what I would consider defensive violence, because to be sure, right-wingers have engaged in violence. I mean, like you've got, I'm confusing it. Is it Charlottesville or was it Charlotte? The alt-right Charlottesville and other examples, January 6th and whatnot. I mean, you could make the case that the right.
So this is where it makes me so mad what some people on the left have done. But those cases of violence go through our judicial system and are not always what we would consider justice, but they go through the process that we've set up as a society. It is not in the hands of Vosh fans or whoever to respond to a violent act by a group of white supremacists with violence towards other, or even towards those white supremacists, or going out and attacking other Republicans for the white supremacist Republicans. Or even the only time that progressives, it would be defensive violence against the people who did Charlottesville, would be if they were at Charlottesville being attacked by those people or defending someone else who was being attacked. That's self-defense. Seeing a massive group of people take part, a small group of a massive group take part in violence, doesn't give you justification to go do vigilante violence.
So no, I mean, in principle, I'd agree with that. I don't, but I mean, do you think? Okay, let me ask you this, because that's an easy thing to say, and I would agree with you there. Do you think that those lines are, again, kind of objectively determined? Like you said, okay, those instances are going through the justice system. Okay, January 6th, Charlottesville or whatnot, and it might not result in the outcome. Hang on, I'm sorry. Did you answer? It may not result in the outcome that you want, but it went through the justice system. Ergo, you don't have the right to take up arms in response. Now, I'm like you. Like, I mean, I like to think that I've got a reasonably, a reasonable understanding of the rise and fall of the Third Reich and all that. So I don't know, in the 20s and 30s before, because I know that was Vaush's example. He constantly referred to Hitler and the rise of the Nazis. So, thank you. Okay, so I don't know if there were any court cases adjudicated when, the brown shirts and the Nazis engaged in violence against, the Romani and homosexuals and Jews and whatnot. It may have happened, it may not have. But I guess when I hear you say that, it's easy in principle to agree. But I'm sure in the rise of fascist states in the past, or maybe even concurrently in like Turkey and other places, we've seen things technically go through the justice system. And if we simply say, okay, well, it's going through the justice system, so we just need to just back off. Surely you agree that eventually there would come a point where if someone said, hey, Luke, listen, this Holocaust stuff, man, it was adjudicated by the Nazi courts. I mean, as far as Germany's concerned, it's legal, these outcomes, so you just need to kind of, chill. Surely you would agree eventually, like, okay, no, it doesn't matter that it's gone through the courts. Your government is no longer legitimate. The people have a right to rise up. You do agree, right?
Of course.
Okay. So it's not that you disagree with that. It's just, in your estimation, we're far from that line in 2022 America, right? That's fundamentally the difference between you and Vosh in this respect. You both agree there's a line. There's a line for revolution, but he just thinks we're there.
With zero facts behind that. Like, to make the comparison to Nazi Germany, the reason why it's a powerful comparison is because we know how it ended in the, one of the worst mass killings in human history. So, and like you said, it was enacted by a government that, so technically, in some way, it was legal.
Right.
And so then you can pull at the heartstrings of somebody and say, don't you think anything would have been justified to prevent that? And of course, the answer would be yes. But what you don't understand, and then trying to pretend, so this is what he did. He pointed out a bunch of things that the Republican Party has done as bad. And then he said, the Holocaust, that could have been prevented if liberals like you didn't, which is historically very gray area, but like to pretend that it's analogous, whatever. If it wasn't for liberals like you who prevented a violent uprising against the Nazi party. But you didn't establish at all over here how it's analogous, besides the fact, even though I agree we're in a dire situation, that one party is demonizing groups of people, which is a thing that all parties have done, or parties have been doing since the beginning of political parties. And while we're in a really bad situation right now, there is no world in which us violently uprising, like you said, pretending like the line is here, is going to lead to the best outcomes for the future of America.
So to be clear, there again, it's, you agree there's a line. Vosh thinks we've passed that line. You think we're far from it. And if we pretend that the line is here, or if we've passed the line, not only is that not true, it would also lead to bad outcomes for the left and the Democratic Party. Is that fair to say that that's your position?
And more importantly, because the bad outcomes to the left means bad outcomes for the people.
Right, that the left are trying to protect, at least in theory. Fair enough. Okay. So the other thing that you said earlier was that Vosh, you used the word pretend. Do you think that you and Vosh, you don't think that you and Vosh have like just a legitimate, sincere disagreement of where that line is? Or do you think like he knows we've not crossed that line? He knows, defensive violence, let alone offensive violence, is morally unjustified, but because he hates the right so much, he's advocating for it anyway? I know you're not a mind reader, but what's your take on it?
Yeah. There's two options, maybe three. The first is that he is, either way it goes, he's not presenting himself honestly. But one of the reasons could be, and to be clear, when I was debating him, if you can tell, I was wanting to genuinely have a good conversation, and at the end I didn't feel like we hadn't had one. I felt like we had a disagreement, we hashed it out, and the conversation was over. I was actually fine with it. It wasn't until I watched it back that I was like, oh my gosh, she was being so slimy. And so here's the options. Number one is he won't say this because it'll get him kicked off platforms. But he honestly believes that progressives should just be going out and enacting violence on Republican leadership and start crazy violent riots. But he can't say that because it would get him kicked off platforms.
Sure.
Specifically calling for violence against Republicans. Or the second option is he doesn't believe that. He doesn't believe the line is where it is, but he sees that it's really bad, as I recognize, and knows that he can manipulate people's emotions because it is bad to get a lot of followers, and it's very provocative, so a lot of people will hear about it and it'll get a lot of views and stuff, to have like the most radical view on this topic. That can be very beneficial career-wise for him. So that's the second option. And then the third option is he's just like not, but he seems like a smart guy. So the third option is just kind of didn't think it through enough. And he's just kind of being dumb on this, and his emotions made him say something that was kind of stupid, and then he tries to defend it in any way possible. So then the conversation led him to, whoa, am I now standing in a place where I have to say we're analogous to Nazi Germany right after I said we should have taken out Nazi Germany leadership? Oh God, like I don't actually believe that. So now I'm going to squirm around. So either way, he presented himself dishonestly, but I don't know if it's because he was dishonest in his beliefs or just afraid of getting deplatformed for the beliefs that he genuinely holds.
So, I mean, I genuinely didn't consider the second and more cynical option, which is that he knows better but is milking this to, gain clout. It's entirely possible. I don't think that for streamers, even successful streamers, I would not put it past many of them to, I mean, clickbait's a thing, right? I mean, you look at the icons that people use, and the titles and such. So clearly there's like a cynical element where you go for the most sensational headline and whatever, but it's not quite what you believe. Fair enough. I did not consider that. But again, you just used the word pretend, so I was kind of curious. So your gut is, it's either it's either the second option or the third option, which is that maybe he believed it in the moment, but it was just based on emotions and he didn't think it through, and his ego kind of prevented him from backtracking and saying, you know what, Luke, all right, I was a bit hyperbolic, I was a bit exaggerative. Either way, you don't think it's a sincere reflection of his views, right? Or you don't know. Maybe you just use the word pretend casually.
No. But I genuinely stand by the word pretend, and I think I was trying to figure out how in a word. If you consider him having genuinely beliefs that he just can't express on stream, then yeah, none of the options are him genuinely expressing his views. Correct. But I don't think it's like, I think the first one is the least morally shameful. Now, it's morally, okay. Sure. It's morally shameful. The presenting of it is not morally shameful. Like, if you feel like you can't say something on a platform, being really slippery is actually the only thing you can do, even if you genuinely hold a belief. But then that would lead us to him having a horrible belief. So then now he's morally condemned again. But yeah, either way, he's not authentically expressing what he believes. So,
okay. Well, like I said, and I appreciate that clarification. You know, for me, I don't think that we're at the point of revolution. I mean, I'm sympathetic and I completely agree with much of your policy prescriptions in that debate, which was, look, we need to still reach for levers of power before we reach for a firearm. I agree with that. I still think there's time for it now. Hopefully we also agree we can't like reach casually and wimpishly like we have done for years. Now we need to like throw elbows, punch faces, metaphorically speaking, and like really, really go for the levers of power. Negative campaign ads, gerrymandering, all these things. I don't know about you, but I want the Democratic Party to largely duplicate the playbook of the Republican Party where legal. So, I mean, Democrats are no strangers to gerrymandering. I want them to gerrymander more. Playing games like if we ever get a situation where there's a Republican president but a Democratic Senate, I don't want the Senate to have a hearing for a Republican Supreme Court nominee. I want them to play the same games to demonstrate the point. You'll either lose a fair fight or you'll lose an unfair fight because now we're willing to fight dirty as well. I support that kind of aggressive moves for power. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the Democratic Party is very weak and doesn't fight nearly aggressive enough for what they believe in. And I'm of the mind that, yeah, gerrymander the heck out of the country so that you can un-gerrymander it, as weird as that sounds.
No, I agree.
And I think the only consideration that has to be taken into account is, by the way, guys, something about the shadow of my camera is making it look like I have boobs. I promise I don't, but the shadow's cast anyways. I think
I don't want to go tit for tat on that one.
Nice. Wait, what was I just saying? All I could think about was the fact that
look, man, listen, you're a young, I assume, straight guy, so you, as soon as you thought of boobs, like you got
no, I'm actually gay, but seeing them on me is
you really? Oh.
Yeah, I am.
So no, you were talking about the Democratic Party being weak and needing to pursue more aggressive strategy and gerrymander it now so you can un-gerrymander it later.
Yeah, the only thing that needs to be taken into consideration is the Democratic electorate and liberals are very different than the Republican electorate and conservatives. And so the example of blocking nominees, the Republican electorate is like, heck yeah, prevent the Democratic Party from doing anything. As much as liberals hate to hear that, or not liberals, but specifically progressives hate to hear this, a lot of Democratic voters do value bipartisanship and do hate the idea of the Democratic Party being a super obstructionist. They like the idea that Biden, I'm going to snap the Republicans out of their blah, 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 and they're going to wake up and we're going to work together. And I think you have to take that into consideration, but otherwise go as hard as you possibly can. Just do what you're while staying popular.
I do. So that to me I know this might sound like this might sound completely different from what we were just talking about, but to me, what you disagreed with Vaush about and the context in which you disagreed was a microcosm of this broader discussion, which is Vosh perceives the Democratic Party to be impotent, and whereas the right and the Republican Party is radicalized and mobilized, and they're going for the gold, and they don't play by Marquis of Queensberry rules and all these things. And so, because right or wrong, he seems to have lost faith in the Democratic Party's ability to contain the Republicans to any meaningful extent. He's advocating for what he advocates, and that led to your conversation. So I know, in case anybody thinks that, holy shit, we just went on a completely different tangent. To me, this is where I got really interested, because it wasn't the specifics of offensive violence versus defensive violence. Like, to me, that was almost ancillary to a lot of the broader stuff that you and Vosh were hinting at. So I do want to come back to that, because to me, that's the meat of the issue. But I do have a question for you. So you said, you live in Texas, and you just told me that you're gay, and so I got a question. With all in the context of this, with the radicalization of the Republican Party, with all the things that Vosh was talking about, which I know you disagree with, what has been your perspective, or like your sense of security, safety, comfort being a gay man in a red state governed by a regressive governor who is a member of a very regressive party that will likely take power this year? So I just, if you're not comfortable talking about it, you don't have to, but I'm kind of curious.
I'm definitely comfortable. So I think people misunderstand or what the difference is between public discourse and being demonized in public discourse compared to interpersonal interactions. Like, compared to when I was younger, people are more afraid to treat people / me poorly for sexual orientation. And I know more people who are quote unquote conservative than I ever have, who are very pro gay people. I know a close family friend who has been a Republican all his life, has worked for Republicans, like for high up Republicans and anti-gay Republicans, and he officiated a gay wedding recently. And I think people don't understand that we actually are moving forward a lot, but as a backlash to that, there is a small group of loud right-wingers who are very hateful and definitely make it really a lot harder in certain spaces. But like, I've never had a negative, okay, that's not true. I haven't had that many negative interactions being in Texas, being gay or anything like that. The only one, this is a funny story, but I was walking holding someone's hand, and a guy was sitting, he looked very disheveled. Is that disheveled? Yeah.
And disheveled, yeah.
Disheveled, yeah. Yep. And he was like, "You dirty effing homosexuals." And I just laughed because he was like not looking in a condition to get up and fight. So it was just kind of funny. But
that's a strange greeting to give somebody
very strange.
In Texas.
Every other interpersonal interaction I've had is like, the worst I get is, "I just want to let you know that I don't support you doing this." And I'm like, cool. That's it. It's never like overt hatred. But I know I want to say clearly, I also appear very straight. So I'm not discounting other people's negative experiences. I think if you come off as more obviously or stereotypically, even though those are kind of dumb terms,
flamboyant,
flamboyant, you're going to get a little bit more hate, a lot more hate. And I'll let other people speak to those experiences, but personally, yeah, that's been mine.
So now, obviously, I don't take from that you find that acceptable, that that the interpersonally people very often treat you with a modicum of respect, even while they're publicly supporting or advocating for, very regressive policies. Do you? So is that are you saying that has, how do I want to say this, that gives the Republicans more credit with you than they might for other progressives? Like, you're willing to give them more time to change, or it gives you a bit more optimism, the fact that in most cases they are interpersonally tolerant or at least not hostile. Does that inform your fixation, your belief that we can still accomplish things through seizing the levers of power, as opposed to
gives me
shaming them, like Vaush said?
You should shame. Shame's fine, but sometimes not effective depending on the issue. But as far as how it makes me feel, very hopeful, because I think people have a hard time getting out of the moment that we're in, and remembering how recently it was worse in a lot of areas. Not when it comes to the threat to democracy, that's new, and sure, not the radical nature of a lot of these right wingers, but like on LGBTQ issues specifically. I went on Destiny's stream just today, and one of the things that he brought up was, you think about trans people, while they are attacked for sure, the fact that we are getting as a country to the point where a big portion of the country is ready to stand up and defend trans people, and the fact that they are what they identify as, and we're getting all the way into the nitty gritty of sports and bathrooms, and whereas not too long ago it was like that's not even a thing, and such a small portion of the country would have stood up and defended trans people. And then a great example of this is with gay people. Just like 2 seconds ago, they were fighting against gay marriage. You don't hear no one cares anymore, Republican-wise, about gay marriage. Whatever. And so I have hope that we can actually move forward on these issues pretty rapidly in a short period of time, if you can remember that time feels much longer while you're in it, and instead of in retrospect. And so I think people think right now, God, no, it's worse than it's ever been on like LGBTQ stuff. And while it's more in the news, not gay marriage, but trans issues are, we're actually moving forward on these issues and getting more and more people on board with defending people's ability to be who they are and live the way that they want to live. And so it gives me actually hope, my interactions with a lot of conservatives here.
Sure. Okay. Well, I mean, I was just kind of curious because, I am cisgendered and straight and white, even though, I imagine I look very ruddy at the moment because I'm sitting in an 86-degree room because my AC shut down or whatnot, but I'm about as anodyne as it gets in terms of like my immutable characteristics. So a lot of the stuff I've never had to go through. So it's interesting to get your perspective on it.
Neither have I really. I like came out when I was 18, so I had already gotten past like at least the childhood kind of experiences you can get.
Yeah, you missed out on all the childhood kindness of, coming out of the closet in third grade. I mean, exactly. Kids they're so sweet and forgiving.
They are, aren't they?
Little bastards. Well, no, it's interesting because, like I said, I can't really speak to that. I agree that very often people on the left are reluctant or just outright refuse to acknowledge the progress that we've made. Do you think that acknowledging that we've made progress means that we're also obligated to not yearn for it as aggressively or seek to, to gain momentum? If we've made progress as a society with respect to civil rights and human rights, trans rights, gay rights, whatnot, is there like an implicit obligation for the left to say, okay, look, we've made progress, so just quiet down a bit, you can ease up, we'll get there eventually? Or do you think, we as progressives or, the gay and trans community think they're still entitled to say, okay, yeah, we've made progress, but I want more and I want more now, and I don't have to wait and pace myself?
No, so my reason for bringing that up is to inspire.
Well, I asked you. I asked you, so it's not a gotcha thing.
No, I guess my reason for bringing up that I was hopeful. Well, my reason for answering that I was hopeful is to inspire people that we can make fast, progressive progress, and we can fight aggressively for it. And what I'm pushing back against is guys, it's just been getting worse for the last 50 years, and it keeps getting worse in every area. And that's why there's no hope and we need to get ready for violence. Here's what I see. I think you have multiple forces at play in a political environment, especially in one, I don't think people understand this either, but the world's changing so fast now compared to other times. And we are, partly because of technology and culture and globalization, in such a rapid change. And I think what comes with that, and just to say, generally, the change is actually in a progressive direction. And so what comes with that is going to be a backlash of a dying, like, angry animal in a corner.
Yeah.
And I think that is what the far right represents, is a brand of Americanism that is going away. People no longer care about, who you're with, generally romantically, and people don't care, and they even want to support you if you want to be who you are, and people don't generally, we're getting ideally to a place where people can treat everyone equal based on their race. So we're not even close to there, obviously, but I'm saying that's the direction we're hopefully headed in. So then what we see is when you have a broad population moving in that direction, there's going to be a group that rejects it, is reactionary, and hates that that's the way their country's going. And they'll go hard against it. And what comes with that is attention given to that group. And right now, that group's pretty big. But I don't think people understand that the people you hear on social media, on Fox News, they represent the radical wing. And that's what I consider the base. There's all these other people who don't really agree with that, but they vote Republican because that's just how they vote. And they believe in conservatism. If you instantly snap and took away all of legacy Republican voters who don't want to go out and attack educators for teaching stuff they don't like, you wouldn't be able to win an election as Trump. Trump actually got a lot of votes from a lot of different groups that weren't just his base. And so I think his base represents the fading away of, but backlashing super hard. Like they say, what do they say? Like a snake before it. No.
Well, I was going to say, you've heard that expression that a wounded animal or a cornered animal is the most dangerous.
Right. So that poses a threat. I think that is when fascism can occur. You are at threat of before that animal completely goes away. I don't like using the word die because we're talking about violence right now, but by the time the animal goes all the way away into Sleeperland,
before that animal makes peace and reintegrates with society, right? Yeah,
exactly.
Before it's defeated. Yeah,
right. Very, very dangerous.
Yeah.
And can even take power, because there's a lot of people complicit with it, i.e., moderate Republicans. So I'm hopeful, though, we're gonna push past, but it's gonna take radical, aggressive action, just non-violent, progressive action, movement to squash the remainder of this more reactionary, hateful movement. And then we can continue, or we will spark a continuation of progressive movement forward.
Yeah, so to dovetail this, to try to helix these topics, again, your debate with Vosh and my conversation with Pac-Man that was inspired by your debate with Vosh, and then your conversation with Destiny's review of your conversation with Vosh, and the broader things that I want to talk about. I guess I would say this. I agree with you that I certainly have never and would not advocate for the lengths to which Vosh does about where we are in the decay of the republic or whatever. I don't own a gun. I have no intention of owning a gun. And I also agree that he muddied the waters either because he was actually revealing what he really felt or because he was pissed. And like Destiny's a great example of someone when he gets mad, he hyperbolizes, to a great degree. Whatever it is, I agree that he muddied the water because he did say defensive violence, defensive violence, defensive violence. And then he said things like, taking shots at, right-wingers in their $16,000 trucks just driving around or whatnot. So I agree that no matter what his intentions were, he muddied the waters. And I don't support that. The only other thing I want to say before I kind of get to the broader point is that I also agree with you that, and I think Vosh himself made this distinction, I don't think the rank and file members of the Republican Party are evil. And what I mean by that is most of my family, I live in a red state too, I live in Kentucky. So I live in the lair of Mitch McConnell, the eldritch abomination of the GOP. And many of my family members are Republican, and I love them. Sometimes loving them has been hard at times because it's not simply minor policy discrepancies, it's major differences between values about truth and equity and equality and compassion and empathy and all these things. I don't think they're evil. I think they're actually victims of the Republican Party because the sad thing is Republican policy hurts Republicans as much as it hurts Democrats. Very few members of the Republican base benefit from GOP policies. It's usually the ultra-rich. West Virginia is still financially in a bad place, and it's been governed by Republicans since time immemorial. Same for Kentucky. When Republican policies just suck, they don't work. So I think that in many cases they're victims. But I also think that in their devotion to either the GOP as an institution or to President Trump as a cult of personality, they are threats. They are threats to the health of the republic. Now, I want to be very clear about that I don't think that they need to be dealt with and would not support dealing with them the way that Vosh has somewhat indicated, because many of them are my loved ones. But I can't pretend that they're not dangerous to you, to me, to themselves, to their children, to my nieces and nephews, and to total strangers. So I just want to be clear about that. Like, I agree that they're not acting necessarily with overt maliciousness, but they are still dangerous, and they are still a problem, and they need to stop doing what they do, which is vote red all the time and excuse Trump's excesses. And I think it's also important, and hopefully you do this. I mean, I got the impression that that's what you do based on your correspondence with Pac-Man in Austin, Texas. But they need to be taken seriously as the front line, as the cannon fodder, as the front line of defense for the true nexus of that is the Republican Party. Do you agree with that? Do you agree that the legacy Republicans, the kind of center-right, that they are, based on their actions and the cover they give for the GOP, that they are dangerous?
100%. And I think shouting that from the rooftops is beautiful and totally what we should be doing. I think even concerning ourselves too much with trying to move over Republicans specifically, like devout Republicans, is probably not an effective political project. What is effective is convincing moderates, centrists, and independents that Republicans are the threat that you're talking about. And I think people only trust your analysis of the situation if you come off as factual, level-headed, logical. And I think, obviously, as has been made clear, using Vosh's rhetoric, completely makes you lose your credibility as someone who is level-headed and can give a good analysis of the situation, leading to those moderates and the people in the middle who do decide elections. Obviously, turnout has an effect, but a lot of people are going to vote Democrat and a lot of people are going to vote Republican. And which way we go as of now until we completely diminish the size of the Republican electorate through, to be clear, the wacko Great Replacement Theory people, not through a malicious thing, but just through politics and convincing more people to come to our side.
And energizing our base, I assume, right?
And energizing
not
our
just,
base.
Yeah.
That's the way that we have to do that through convincing people how dangerous the Republican Party is. But that's the way that we prevent any damage the Republican Party could do. And one of the points I heard in Destiny's reviewing of my debate that he said that I thought was really good was the Republican Party has done everything that we see as bad through democratic means. Like they got using the democracy into power and did things that we think are dangerous. They got into power and said rhetoric using the platform of power, things that we see as dangerous and harmful. So pretending like the way to stop them isn't through that same democracy is silly. And I know you agree with that at this point.
I do, but see, I guess the only difference I would argue on that is I'm sympathetic to the impression some people have. It infuriates me, and I like people who say, "Oh, to hell with it, it's over, it's done. I'm not going to vote in the next election." I saw this one thread by a Twitter user earlier today in response to President Biden saying that he was looking into canceling $10,000 of student debt per person who makes under X amount of money. She was pissed, and she said, that's not enough. I would still have X number of dollars left in student debt, and I'm just not going to vote for him. And as people have pointed out, it's so selfish because of because again of the threat that the Republican Party poses. So you making that decision and just kind of throwing in the towel and not turning up or turning out risks, the accelerated end of the republic. So I'm infuriated by that. That drives me nuts. It's like, okay, regardless of your views on Biden, love him or hate him, vote anyway. Vote blue no matter who, because as a matter of harm reduction, it's just a fact. It's just a fact. It's not a matter of debate. It's not up for opinion. It's a fact that they get you closer to the outcomes you want. It's like public transportation. It may not get you to the end destination, but it will save you some walking, and that matters, especially for the people who are most vulnerable.
And to be clear, in the general election, vote blue no matter who is 100% true. I think for some reason people take that as like, so just be great during the primary with whoever the moderate is. I don't know. It's so confusing. No. People are like, that's such a dumb phrase. It's such a dumb phrase. And I'm like, really? Why? So you're saying vote for Republican? Oh, you're saying not vote? Okay, shut up. Sorry. You're with me. Right. So, oh God, it makes me so mad.
No, man.
Once you get to a general election, of course you should vote for the better candidate. Oh.
Right. Yeah. If you want to vote for the more ideal candidate or the more optimal candidate in the primary, fair enough, unless now I do think it would be kind of irresponsible. Let's take West Virginia as an example. If Manchin is ever primaried by a true progressive, I would hesitate before voting for that progressive, even though I would want that, because the last thing I would want to do is undermine Manchin in an election he would almost certainly has the best chance of winning in a state like that. But that's very specific. Otherwise, I agree. Vote blue no matter who in the general. But what I was saying was that, having said all that, I am sympathetic to the idea, and I didn't hear your conversation yet with Destiny, and I am looking forward to it. But Destiny actually said a lot of shit in his review of your conversation with Vosh that infuriated me. And I've actually been trying to get at Destiny's attention for a couple of days, and I'm going to keep trying, because he is straying way too close to the enlightened centrist trope. Like, even during his review of your conversation, he said multiple times that when someone said, don't you think the Republican Party would, definitely overturn democracy as if they had the chance. His response was, "Oh, I think the Democratic Party would do it too. The progressives, I mean, like, bro,
Yeah, that was
you've
weird.
lost the forest for the trees." Yeah, it's infuriating to me for all the faults that progressives have. Republicans are just, I'm sorry, they're just objectively worse at every level. But I'm sympathetic to the idea that, okay, yes, Republicans have used the levers of power to acquire more power and to shape the game in their favor. And so that would imply, or could imply, that we should do likewise, which I advocate for. But I also think they did it in bad faith. And so that's what it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, which I guess brings us full circle. Republicans did that by playing the game not just aggressively, but ruthlessly. Absolutely ruthlessly, and applying double standards. So be it, let's just look at modern history. So, with McConnell's unprecedented obstruction, which owes its genesis to Newt Gingrich during the Clinton years, using the filibuster and, threatening government shutdowns to try to make Clinton look bad. And then McConnell took that Gingrich playbook and he ran with it during the Obama presidency. And we see him in very many cases doing the same here. It's not just, I think Destiny and a lot of centrists think that, they just played the game better. They did, but they also played it corruptly and in bad faith, and using double standards and breaking norms and creating norms and then breaking them when it was convenient. That's how they got power. And if we're going to avoid the route that Vaush thinks that we're going down, I think we have to play the game just like that, which is why I even gave the example of denying Supreme Court nominees if we ever get the chance. And so that kind of brings us back full circle, so I want to toss it back to you. You said, look, conservatives and liberals, right-wingers and leftists are different, and they are, but that the left seems to be, on the whole, that they have more faith in bipartisanship and they want us to play more civilly and not throw elbows, don't foul people out. Don't you think that that's a problem? And don't you think that as a commentator and as an influencer, or as politicians, if you're President Biden and Chuck Schumer and Speaker Pelosi, don't you have an obligation to try to change and shape leftist opinions away from that? Does that make sense? Because it's a circle, right? You're not just reactionary to the whims and wishes of your base. You can also influence them.
Of course. I don't think the average left-wing person / liberal is against their politicians fighting super aggressively. What I kept saying they would be repulsed by was violent rhetoric. And if by throw elbows you just mean like within the bounds of our democratic system, doing everything possible to try to take hold and use power for good things, of course, let's do it. Let's crush them.
Well, I gave specific examples. I want to be clear.
Yeah,
I gave specific examples, and so gerrymandering, which you agreed with. Democrats have done it in the past. Republicans just do it better and more aggressively. I think Democrats should raise their game. I think when we got power, we should draw the most ridiculously lopsided, favorable maps for us that we can get away with. I think we need to take it to the very brink. I think if we could find a way in every state to corral every Republican voter in one district, I'm A-okay with it. I'm cool with it. And I mean that. I think when it comes to Supreme Court nominations...
So let's answer it one at a time.
Sure.
On gerrymandering.
Yeah.
I would probably want to like sit and think through a little bit before giving like an 100% A-okay answer. Because I think, for example, whenever the Republican Party does it, sometimes they'll... oftentimes it'll be like disenfranchising a large percentage of black people specifically through their gerrymandering. And if we're doing something where we're also disenfranchising, but generally, yeah, I'm pretty good with us trying to use the rules as they currently are. Like, of course, draw those lines as wacky as possible to help the Democrats.
So
for the time being.
just to clarify, the thing that would make you hesitate is if Democrats gerrymandered conservatives on like racial or ethnic or gendered bounds,
which could end up happening, but like that could happen. But I think generally the way
perhaps technically,
like Democrats do use gerrymandering right now a lot.
Yeah,
and I think I'm great with that because otherwise they would just be, accepting loss in many cases. So yeah, I'm 100% okay. I just had to kind of think through that in my head.
Sure,
so
that's
the second
fair.
thing was what?
Okay. SCOTUS nominees. So I would completely support in a scenario. Let's say President DeSantis is inaugurated January 2025. After vomiting,
Wait,
I would support.
Say it again. I was reading chat. Go for it again.
No, it's fine. So let's say that.
I heard vomiting.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm imagining the hypothetical, and I'm freaking out. So let's say that Ron DeSantis wins. Let's say he wins the Republican primary in 2024. It'll probably be Trump if Trump runs. And let's say he wins the general, and let's say he's inaugurated January 2025, and let's say I don't know who's next in line at this point in terms of age, but it would probably be Alito or Thomas. Let's say there's a Supreme Court vacancy. But let's say somehow either in 2025 or the next election cycle that Democrats have the Senate. Republican president, Democratic Senate.
Nope.
I would be A-okay with a Democratic Senate not having a hearing for a Republican Supreme Court nominee. A-okay with it. 1 year in, 2 days away from the election, it doesn't matter. I'm cool with it. Would you support that?
Again, that would be a thinker. My gut reaction, I'll tell you, is yes. But again, I think Democratic voters dislike obstructionism way more than Republican voters. Republican voters love
100%.
it. And so I think I would have to look, I don't know if it's polling or previous times how it affected. I just know when the Democrats have played that game a little bit, it can actually cause their own electorate to be annoyed with them and can politically damage them more. So here's my answer. Do what is most politically advantageous in that situation based on the current state.
I completely agree. I completely agree, and we'll get to that in a second. So to be clear, your only objection that you can think of now would be as if it's bad strategy. Otherwise, you're A-okay with it. To hell with them. They started this, and you're okay with playing by their rules.
Yeah.
Okay. Me too. So before we get to bad strategy versus good strategy, I gave those examples, and you mentioned that was after I mentioned the SCOTUS appointment. I got another one real quick. Another example. I support weaponized political hearings from Democrats. I would love
agreed,
a 100%. Democrat Benghazi. Would love it. A-okay for it. Take Mark Meadows
besides the Benghazi part.
I should clarify. That's going to get clipped. I do not support the triggering incident of Benghazi, but the hearings, the political hearings. Right. Taking Secretary. Oh my God, who was Trump's Secretary of State? I'm blanking on his name. Mike Pompeo. I'd be cool with making him testify over some equivalent, the Ukraine extortion thing, whatever it is, some sort of foreign snafu, the withdrawal from Syria, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I would be A-okay with that. Just politically motivated, just nakedly so, but because we have the power, we're going to put you through it and give you as much bad press as possible. I'm cool with that because they did it to Secretary Clinton. Do you have a problem with that?
So, but to be clear, I don't want people doing things purely because it was done to the Democratic Party. I want them doing things because, one, it worked for Republicans, and also we think it would work for us. So I do think heavily politicized hearings would be perfect because you put a bunch of attention on something, and you can kind of frame it in such a way that is really beneficial to your party. But I don't just want like, yeah, that hurt, so we're doing it to you, even though it doesn't benefit us at all. Yeah.
I completely agree. And to be clear, my hypotheticals are predicated on the assumption that Democratic strategists think that it would be a winning strategy, that would be effective. If they ever concluded, no, this would not, there's no way we could make this work, then no, they shouldn't do it. I'm just saying, if they concluded, you know what, we should try this because we might be able to make it work, would you support it?
Yeah.
Cool. So when I gave you these examples, again, that's when you brought up, look, okay, Republican voters, they love obstructionism. They're A-okay with it. They're cool with it. But liberals and Democratic voters, they kind of hold their elected representatives to a different standard. They want bipartisanship. They don't have as much tolerance for even their own team being obstructionists. And my question to you was, don't you think that Democratic leaders, from President Biden, Speaker Pelosi, Leader Schumer, thought leaders like Bernie and AOC and whoever else, and even you and David Pacman and Brian Tyler Cohen, Vaush, Destiny, whoever, people who command some audience, shouldn't you try to advocate for, do you think there's any benefit, and then do you think you should advocate for changing those standards? Because I think that we're playing by two different sets of rules, and I don't see how that benefits Democrats. So we should try to change the rules. And if the rules are informed by our voter base expecting things differently from us, I think we should try to shape their expectations. What do you think?
Yeah. But I think you can get into a situation where you actually, and this is something people don't like to hear, you do lead the Republican Party to going further. In the examples you gave, obviously, I gave my answer, but the goal shouldn't be condition liberals to want our government to not be functional as much as possible. The only thing I think is beneficial is to make sure that Democratic voters are to try to, as you're saying, as commentators, as influencers, blah, 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 condition them or just try to influence people to be okay with their representatives fighting as hard as the other side does for what they believe in. Now, the only thing that I don't want the Democratic Party doing is things that are overtly undermine all of our democratic institutions. And so the Republican Party does that really well. And that's why I paused super long on the judge question, because I do think if you have Democratic voters also who right now trust the institutions more, if you also decrease their trust a bunch, like the Republican Party's is, then you're in a place where the entire country doesn't have any faith in our democratic processes, which is really, really bad for a society surviving democratically.
I think that's quite a conundrum you've illustrated. I think it's fair. I think the way I look at it, though, and I could be completely wrong, but this is, I guess, just as we kind of near the end of the conversation, I guess I'll just give my, instead of asking kind of Socratically, and I appreciate you being a good sport about that, I'll give you my take in general on it. I think I read a really good article that actually, again, Pacman covered a couple of months ago by a Canadian political scientist called Thomas Homer Dixon. Did you see? I don't know if you watched all Pacman's
by
stuff.
2024 or whatever.
Yes, correct. He's not the only expert with that kind of very grim sentiment. And my sense of it is, and you may not disagree, you may completely agree, but my sentiment is that we are reaching a genuine inflection point, and the stars could align in such a way that this party, which is so unpopular, relatively speaking, so ineffective, relatively speaking. They suck at everything they do except for seizing power. They're really good at that. I compare them to Scar in The Lion King. They're really good at scheming and seizing power, but then the Pride Lands turn to shit, in just a few weeks. They suck at ruling, and they always have. But despite all these deficits, because in some ways they played the long game, there are more red states than blue states, and it wasn't necessarily the Republican Party, but it was conservatives throughout the history of this country. They created the Dakotas. There was a political advantage to that with a sparse population, rural conservative voters. They play the long game in certain ways. McConnell with all of his judicial appointees, which is why I'm really happy President Biden, has appointed more in his term so far than President Trump did. But the stars could align in a way that this paper tiger could forever change the country. And I am sympathetic to the idea that Vosh said in particular, that the milquetoast liberal, we need a strong Republican Party, which, by the way, is something that Destiny agrees with, which is very frustrating. And I know you don't. You specifically said that was stupid when you talked with Vosh.
Here's a question.
But go ahead.
I can't remember Destiny's statement on that, but from my belief, if you're saying we need, which I think this is what Nancy Pelosi meant, and that's why, like, if we could have leaders that communicated effectively, that would be amazing in the Democratic Party. We have all these people who just can't even get a
way
sentence
too much,
out,
man.
right? Can you imagine a politician be good at speaking?
I've watched The West Wing. I've seen Martin Sheen, so that's about the closest I've ever seen. Go ahead.
So if she meant in a healthy democracy, you need a strong opposition, I totally agree. We need at least two parties. It'd be cool to have more going on, but I think that's what she meant. We need a strong, healthy democracy where there's opposing parties that keep each other in check. I agree with that. I think everyone should, because single power rule, isn't great. It's horrible. It always leads to bad things. But I just think the Republican Party should be like the far edge is the Mitt Romneys, That's the far right.
So what's interesting is I would say I agree with the very prologue of what you just said, but ultimately I disagree. So listen, I agree with you that no entity should have absolute power, and that no entity, be it a person or an oligarchy or even a party, should be unchecked. I believe in the importance in a good faith dissenter. Completely agree. Number one, the Republican Party has not been that in decades. If they ever were, they ain't it now, number one. And I wish Destiny would really embrace that, and others too. I just let the words leave your mouth. The Republican Party isn't that, and they haven't been that in decades. And I know you agree with that. Number two, I don't think the Democratic Party would ever become that monolithic, unchecked entity. And you know that because we fight amongst ourselves even when it's not opportune to do so. We can't help it. Bernie Sanders hates Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin hates Bernie. Well, probably not. It's probably the contempt is probably more one way than the other. But we fight amongst ourselves to a far greater extent than Republicans do, and not that Republicans don't, but just not as often. The saying is, Democrats fall in love and Republicans fall in line. And in terms of modern history, that is more often the case.
Yeah. So I think if you had a situation where the Republican Party got so weak that it wasn't relevant, I think you would just see a Democratic Party and like a progressive party, like the moderate,
yes,
quote unquote centrist party, and then the farther left
and
party,
I'm cool with that. I'm absolutely cool with that, because to me that would be the closest thing to a good faith right-wing conservative party, because it's all relative, right? So if you get rid so like the Republican Party the people who currently vote Republican, they're not ready to be like moderate Democrats. I think people forget that
even though we're going to get them there, we're going to lead a progressive movement. It's happening, baby. We're not to a place yet where the broad, the far right of the country is not even close to being Manchin. Manchin's like in the center, sort of. Not to the center. He's sort of to the right.
No. I want to say I agree with that. I'm not thinking in terms of the voting base. I'm thinking in terms of government. What I would like to see is a Republican Party that's not held hostage by its far right base. Basically, I would like the far right in this country in terms of voters to be homeless, and then they just eventually either convert or fade away over time. But I'm saying, relatively speaking, the Manchins of the Senate would be the new conservative party. I'm just saying in the hype, what you told me was that maybe Pelosi and maybe Destiny were getting at is we need good dissent and good opposition. I agree. I just don't think we need the Republican Party to do that. We could almost and I'm speaking metaphorically, not literally, you could just cut that off, and then the next rightmost wing of politics would become the moderate conservative dissent. It would just be better faith.
Yeah.
If basically, like you said, Mitt Romney was the cutoff. Like we draw the velvet rope behind Romney and Liz Cheney, who by the way voted for, Trump. I think she voted for Trump policies upwards of 90% of the time. So she's right wing. She's just good faith right wing, where she would rather have the Republican Party lose than win and risk the health of the country. That's good. That's good faith. That's the kind of civic leadership that we need. People who put country over party. Now, I think I agree with you. I just don't think that has anything to do with the Republican Party, because the Republican Party hasn't been that thing in decades.
I agree with you on maybe the good faith thing, but I think decades ago they were representing, they weren't beholden to such a, let's say here's where everyone is, sort of.
Yeah.
And then there's this group over here, way to the right of everyone, that controls everything over here. I don't think that was the case. I think the far right people who were in power over the last few decades it kind of broke down the demographics of the country as far as politics goes. Fine. It wasn't until maybe you're saying the Newt Gingrich, I don't know his first name ever. I always
Newt. No, yeah, you had it right.
Newt or Nuke. It's Newt, I know, but I always flip
Nuke would be his drunk alter ego where he's ready to have a bar fight. Oh my God, Newt Gingrich, he's about to throw down.
I think his kind of era, obviously Reagan had his issues. None of these people do I agree with politically. But I'm saying, when did it start fading away from good faith engagements? So we're definitely in a new time where a very radical edge is so dominant over the entire party, which is
right.
new.
And the party's too weak to actually exercise its prerogatives as elected representatives. Okay, yeah, your goal is to get elected and to get reelected, but the reason it's not a direct democracy is your voters, in theory, the contract is they entrust you to make decisions on their behalf. And that means what Liz Cheney and Mitt Romney, and I would say all of them, need to do is, even if, as the polling indicates, and I know you've seen the polls because a lot of them I got from Packman and Brian Tyler Cohen and whatnot, it's a sizable chunk of the Republican base that it was 30% believe that violence is an acceptable way to correct political issues. Number one, it's not 5%, 3%, 30%. That's huge, number one. Number two, 80% of them, 90% of them think that the election was stolen. That's scary in and of itself, too.
It wasn't wasn't that much, but I hear what you're saying.
I could bring the polls up, but yes, it was a majority, not a large minority. It was a decisive majority of the Republican base, and also the majority of Republicans want candidates who are loyal to President Trump. That's incredibly dangerous. And a responsible civic leader would say, I don't care if that's what you want. That's not correct. We're not going to do it. So I agree that they have to play to their base, but at least if we're going to put faith in institutions, Luke, that's also part of it. They still have an obligation to do the right thing, even if it's unpopular with their base, and most of them won't do it. So they have failed the institutions in this country. They're not behaving in an institutionalist fashion, except for Adam Kinzinger, who's not running again, Liz Cheney, who is running again and is Trump's enemy number one, and Romney, who's also persona non grata. So that's my take on it, is just, look, I think that we are in a position, a context where the stars could align to really bring about a dangerous time, a truly dangerous time in the history of this country that it may take decades to recover from. We may have that Thomas Homer Dixon dystopian outcome. And so to that end, I want Democrats to take the gloves off. I want them to gerrymander. I want them to use aggressive, cynical messaging. I want them to summon the spirit of Harry Reid.
Since we've been going for a bit, I'm confused what it is you took issue with, because it seems like every time I've refuted Vaush's stuff, you've agreed. So, like, what is it that you took issue with my...
I would say probably the biggest one that I took issue with was that you, I think, put way too much emphasis on Biden winning in 2020 as a sign of optimism. It was about this, and that's where I wish I'd had more time before the AC kicked out and all this crap earlier, the issues that we had with Streamlabs, because I wanted to find that direct quote, but the exchange was about, bipartisanship and how Biden's moderate rhetoric and his appeals to bipartisanship and his kind of milquetoast presentation have not done him any favors. And at one point in that tangent, you said he won. And Vosh countered with, yeah, but Trump got more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016. You said, yeah, but Biden won. My issue is, I think you're putting, at least that gave me the indication that you're putting way too much emphasis on Biden winning one election, and the stars had to align for him to win it. Yeah, Trump presided over COVID, the economy, and the toilet.
I don't know, what it is about long. Maybe it's just because it was so long, or people want to disagree. I don't know what it is, but the misunderstandings that came out of that conversation drive me nuts. First off, when did I ever say his milquetoast politics?
No, you didn't. Vosh did.
But
Vosh did.
He didn't say it did him favors.
No, you said that Biden won, right, and that his approach got him a victory.
What we were talking about was, I said there is a line clearly for America where the Republican Party fails so miserably that they go with someone else. And the example I cited was Biden. But then he said Trump got more votes than that, which I'm like, true. I didn't say this in that moment, but my sentiment is true. That's really scary. But the point that I was making stands, that clearly more people are on the side of not wanting Trump in power at that given moment in time because he had failed so hard. Because Vosh was pretending like it was just completely inevitable that Trump would get in power and be able to just stay in power and no one cares. Like, there is a way to fight them democratically, and Biden's example of that. It's not like, oh, we're good forever and there's hope for the future because of Biden. And then also, I would never suggest that boring centrism is going to win elections. Biden's general election platform was very progressive. I'm so sick. Two things. I'm sick of obviously right-wingers saying Biden's like a communist. That's stupid. But then I'm also sick of left-wingers pretending like Biden hasn't pushed for some really good progressive stuff. And then you can obviously criticize his weak nature in some of these areas. But and then I'm sick of centrist like political commentators like on MSNBC and stuff pretending as if Biden ran the general election like, I am just a centrist, everyone, I won't do anything, I am super moderate. He ran on a progressive platform. Progressivism is popular if it's framed correctly, but then progressives online suck at framing things because they go in these weird esoteric arguments about all these issues nobody cares. People care less about, and they say things that are idiotic, like Vosh said, instead of just appealing to the very popular parts of progressivism. But anyways, Biden ran on a progressive platform, and that's what helped him win. Obviously, the biggest thing that helped him win was anti-Trump sentiment. So we can rally anger and fear of the Trump movement without promoting violence was the whole point of that. And Biden's an example. No one was talking about taking Trump, out of power violently. No, they were talking about getting Biden elected, and it worked. And we have to figure out how we can do that in the future to a larger scale where we squish the Republican movement non-violently.
Luke. So no, listen. Biden's policies, many of them are, especially because the Overton window is shifted left in general, Biden's policies are very progressive relative to his predecessors. But you will never convince me that he ran as a progressive. He cloaked progressive policies in moderate style and rhetoric and a return to normal.
Yes, and
you will never convince me otherwise.
I think there's value to one of the things that hurt
hang on, but let's be clear on this, because you said he ran as a progressive. Let's be clear.
I said he ran on a progressive platform.
So then I'd like you to acknowledge
as a progressive. Yeah.
His platform may have been progressive, but he made damn sure to not frame it that way. He wanted to distinguish.
I'm pretty sure he said if I get elected, or a lot of people around him at least, I'm going to be the most progressive president in history. I think he definitely said that. But stop on the primary stage, like on the primary debate stage, in the primaries. Sorry, the way I said that made it sound like the primaries. He definitely wanted to distinguish himself as more moderate than people like Bernie and Warren and stuff. And he advertised himself as a moderate. And in the general election, he said, look, I'm moderate, but my policies are progressive because people like progressivism. And I'm sick that... no, I'm not going to keep arguing.
Wait a minute. So you're... we disagree.
Yeah.
So wait, so you're saying... He told people, hey, look, I'm moderate. It's just that everything I'm going to try to bring about is progressive. And no, that's not what he did. He did everything to backdoor progressive policies into his platform.
He did not backdooring them.
He did 100%.
I also support even during wage. I also support.
Even during the general, even after the primary, he was making it a point to distinguish himself
as a
from
moderate. And he's trying to say because there's you misunderstand. There's two things. There's a progressive, the political title that we use currently, that hasn't always been used, but we currently use as a shorthand for far left in the Democratic Party. Then there's the term progressive that means like dramatic progress, and a lot of times just like historic achievements in the left direction. And politicians forever have used that. Biden, if you ask him, are you progressive? He says, yeah, I'm progressive. But he's not a progressive like Bernie is a progressive in the Democratic Party analysis context. But he said he would be the most progressive president in history if he was elected. Clearly, he wanted people to think of him as progressive, but moderate compared to the other candidates that ran in the primary.
So a moderate progressive? That's what you'd say he was trying to advertise himself?
Do you not understand the difference between people saying like, hey, this is a term people use. Hey, we've become a lot more progressive on gay rights. What do they mean by that? We've shifted.
We've advanced.
Yes, progressive. In the direction of left change.
You've achieved something. You've progressed.
That's what they mean, and that's what people use all the time. And it's a huge thing for like people even curse in cinema to try to, pretend to be a progressive, but then also not want to be seen as radical. She ran her initial senatorial campaign and definitely her congressionals as I'm super progressive. And progressive isn't a bad, like, moderates want the electorate to think that they will be progressive, but not necessarily a like radical progressive or whatever. Actually, I'll look it up. Oh, whoops. Hold up. Yep. Biden said, I would be the most progressive president in history.
Can you send me the link? Because I'm pretty sure I could also find quotes of where, he also used moderate rhetoric. I believe in bipartisan.
Himself, yes. Oh,
buddy, you are making a distinction that I do not believe that the voters themselves made.
No,
you're saying
people want someone who's not radical. A lot of people think that way. Do they care what radical means? Not really, but they hear, oh, Bernie's so radical because he's on the left edge and he's known as a progressive, which is the left edge of the Democratic Party. And then people use the word progressive as shorthand for this will help you understand. Ready? I'll say Joe Manchin is very conservative, but yes, in the political sense, you wouldn't say he's a conservative on the divide. You could, but I'm saying he might say, yeah, I'm more conservative than my Democratic colleagues, but he would never say I'm a conservative. We use these terms differently. And Biden was saying, I'll be the most progressive president, but listen, I'm not radical. Nothing will fundamentally change. I'm not, these crazy Bernie bros, which obviously I disagree with that framing, but that's...
Yeah, I think we're talking past each other. I understand that the difference between like the article A in front of a word, a conservative, versus you are conservative or you are relatively conservative, but you are still liberal. You're just a right-leaning or a left-leaning centrist. I'm saying that it was part of Biden's shtick, and maybe we just fundamentally disagree, that though his policies were progressive compared to his predecessors, certainly compared to President Trump, they were not progressive compared to Elizabeth Warren on the whole, Bernie Sanders,
yes,
things like that, and that he deliberately went out of his way to avoid the upper P progressive, or to be considered progressive the way that we commonly use it in U.S. political parlance. Like when MSNBC, when CNN, when people use that adjective, they're not referring to the base adjective like, hey, he's a very progressive person and that he believes in progress. They're using it as the political title. Progressive like AOC, like Bernie.
Sometimes they say, the country has become a lot more progressive, blah, 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 and that just means we've, had progress in the left direction, sort of. I mean, yeah. And then sometimes they use it as like, AOC is a progressive. I don't understand what even the confusion is here.
There is no confusion. My position is Biden did not pitch himself as progressive. Yes, his policies are very progressive, but he styled himself as moderate more than progressive. And that's my position. Either we agree or don't, but you're not going to convince me if it's your intention that Biden was branding himself, hey, look, not only are my policies progressive, I am progressive as well. He was framed and presented by the mainstream media and his voters as the moderate choice.
Compared to other candidates, he wanted to come off as
It's all relative,
moderate.
Luke. It's all
of
relative.
Course, but it's also relative to history. And he wanted to be seen as a progressive candidate historically, but he wanted to be compared to Bernie as moderate. Yes. Excuse me.
Yes. So relatively speaking, compared to his competitors at the time, he was trying to come off moderate. That is my position.
100%. But here's the difference.
Okay.
He didn't want to be seen as completely not progressive. He wanted to be seen as, listen, I'm still progressive so that my, more progressive voters won't leave me, but I'm also moderate. Like that was clearly what he was trying to do.
Okay, that was his goal. So let me ask you, how excited did he make progressives?
Not that.
There you go.
Well,
no.
Actually,
you had it right. Go with your gut, buddy. Go with your gut. You had it.
You don't. No. Shh. Kidding.
No, you had it. You were like, shit. I'm about to concede a point. I can't do that.
Wait, what would I be conceding?
That his attempt to pitch himself as progressive didn't work on actual progressives. People are like, nah, you're still moderate Joe Biden.
No, if you were a progressive and thought, I agree a lot of progressives weren't excited about him, but if you were a progressive and thought his agenda was not progressive, it wasn't as progressive as we'd want, but it was progressive. You morons, not you, maybe, but the people that I'm thinking of. If you genuinely
I enthusiastically voted for Biden because I recognize that a lot of the things. I mean, same thing about
clearly he excited progressives. I'm a progressive, and I am so happy I got to walk.
Yeah, but I am not.
For him.
I am not emblematic, and neither are you, of the general progressive base where we are absolutely thrilled to sing Biden's praises.
What do you do? Like, how do you classify a progressive? Someone who is very, very left leaning, or someone who online says, I'm a progressive? Because there's this base of people, or this sliver of people that's online and makes all of the noise. And then there's all of the voters. And all the voters, a lot of them are really, really progressive, would have voted for Bernie, did in the primary, but don't keep up with all of these things. And they would be like, I'm really progressive, yeah. But they also were really excited, some of them, to vote for Biden. So no, not all progressives hated him, and not all progressives loved him.
No, I think that the progressive vote he won was reluctant. I think most progressives were not enthusiastic about him, and it had nothing to do. I think in many cases they were so consumed with his rhetoric and didn't dig too deeply into his policies. Because I agree with you, relatively speaking, you could make the argument, unless you kind of adjusted for inflation, so to speak, historically speaking. But Biden is in many ways the most progressive president in U.S. history in terms of policies. So I agree with that. I don't think most progressives looked that deeply into it. I think that the progressives he did win were more fearful of Trump than motivated by Biden, and then the rest didn't turn out at all. So getting back to the Vosh thing, my point was this. You presented it in a way that suggested that Biden's style, his approach, which we both agree is more moderate. He makes constant overtures to his buddy Mitch McConnell and working with Republicans and all these things that Bernie Sanders would never say in a lifetime. And I'm not even saying it's a bad idea. But Biden's style is to present himself as a moderate at every opportunity and then sneakily govern as a progressive when he can. And I like that. I'm fine with that. The thing is, though, where Vosh is correct, Destiny is completely incorrect, and I'm curious where you stand because you suggested more of the Destiny approach. Biden's not being rewarded for his moderate rhetoric. Do you agree with that? Do you think that Biden is suffering from, or I shouldn't say suffering from, do you think that his moderate rhetoric is doing him any favors in terms of his approval or his legislative success?
Yeah, I think it is doing him favors.
Really?
And could it be hurting him too? Yeah. But here's the favor that it did him. If Bernie Sanders was president, and to be clear, everyone, I supported Bernie during the primary, and I, stand by that today. But then looking at Biden as an individual, as, him not being compared to Bernie. Well, okay, now I'm going to compare him to Bernie. If Bernie was president, would Republicans have felt comfortable crossing the aisle to pass a infrastructure bill? I don't know.
It's possible that would have never happened because, if I remember correctly, Bernie was, I don't even know if he voted for it. I can't remember. No, he must have. He must have voted for it. But he was reluctant to because it was too compromising.
But the point is, Biden's moderate veneer does allow Republicans to feel more comfortable, I think, working with him than the radical socialist. But then also, but getting Republicans to work with you, I don't think is the primary concern. I think you should bank on, you can try, but then you should bank on pretty much budget reconciliation is going to be your main.
Right, which I think you only get 2 of those per year.
Right, way to pass something. So, but I think people mistake his low approval rating for it being all the reasons they want it to be. It's because he's not, this enough, or he's not Bernie enough. The real reason is there's so many negative after effects of a pandemic that wasn't managed well economically, and then all of the issues that have rippled out from that. You're gonna be dinged when you're the person in power when all of that hits the fan. All of that poop hits the fan.
I completely agree, and I want to make my position very clear. I'm not committing to the idea that Biden would be more successful if he were openly more progressive.
So
No,
what is it that Destiny said you didn't like?
What Destiny's the thing that Destiny said that I don't like, and I don't have the quote handy, but he said it multiple times over the last couple of weeks. Is he plays defensive for Republicans. He's like, look, if Republicans weren't interested in bipartisanship, Biden would have passed. Biden wouldn't, that dipshit subhuman, leftists, they don't understand that Biden would have been able to pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill if the Republicans weren't interested in bipartisanship. That's stupid. That's very lazy analysis. Biden got one legislative victory, that bipartisan infrastructure bill, and those who voted, those Republicans that did vote for it, have been lambasted by their base and by most of the members of their party. McConnell is experiencing a caucus in many ways in open defiance. Whereas Lindsey Graham, who is one of the biggest sycophants I've ever seen in the Senate, where he is openly questioning McConnell's leadership. I don't think that we can have a majority leader who doesn't swear fealty to Donald Trump. You had people like Matt Gaetz and others, and Tucker Carlson, major powerful figures in the Republican Party or in the right-wing movement, condemning those few Republicans that gave Biden a political victory. So Destiny and others can point to one, and Republicans aren't really inclined to do it again because they suffered major consequences.
I don't believe generally the Republican Party is interested in bipartisanship. They don't care at all. Anyone who says that, I agree. I think it's really dumb. And so if Destiny said it that way, that's dumb. Saying there's no chance of getting anything done working with Republicans, like saying they'll never be bipartisan maybe, is like not completely accurate. And that's what he was saying, like, oh, people say it's impossible, but look, Biden did it. That might have been what got him so mad. But I think, and your impression was nice. But I think...
Thank you.
Yeah, I can never talk as fast as he talks. It's funny.
I can't either, man. It's like he is like the anti-Ben Shapiro. Like I feel like,
but a better voice.
Two of them confronting.
It doesn't sound like this.
Yeah. Okay, gang. My wife's a doctor, gang.
Yep. But anyways, I think like the reason the Republicans came across the aisle is they felt like it was going to be such a popular thing to do, to invest in infrastructure, and that's really all they cared about, not about bipartisanship. Right. And I don't think we should rely on like, oh no, our agenda needs to rely on Republicans crossing the aisle. Not going to happen. They don't care.
Yeah.
But do a lot of Democratic voters like that idea that Biden's trying to cross the aisle? Yes. Now, did Biden go too far and just never give up and waste a lot of time when he could have just focused on how to get his own party in line? Yeah, I think he wasted a lot of time after he realized there wasn't going to be anyone crossing the aisle on certain things he was going to try to do. But regardless, the focus still zero. Like I think it was kind of fine. Like he tried Republicans, he got something done, and the focus went into Manchin and Sinema's kind of world. And the only thing that I kind of argue with Destiny about today was not the only thing. One of the things was I do think it would have been good for Biden to push up against Sinema directly and Manchin in very strategic ways, to make their voters aware that they're standing in the way of things that their voters could really benefit from.
Oh, so like what's interesting is, and this may surprise you, but I actually give Biden credit, and a lot of people hate this. I've argued with people on Twitter and in other places. I think that Biden, again, as a simply a matter of harm reduction, Biden did the right thing. He did the right thing by decoupling the social spending bill from the infrastructure bill, because I'm convinced that had he played hardball with Manchin and Sinema and said, no, we're not decoupling it, it's either all or nothing, I don't think they wanted that infrastructure spending so bad they would have accepted the social spending. So a lot of people like Representative Cortez and Omar and Sanders and everybody thought it was a huge mistake. You should have never decoupled it. You should have played chicken with them. I think those two are the last two people with whom you want to play chicken. And I think it would have cost him the infrastructure bill if he'd said, nope, it's all or nothing. I'm not taking it. We'll do our best. If you decouple it, we'll take a good look at social spending. No, either pass it or you don't. I think they would have given him the finger. I really do. Because Manchin's popularity has skyrocketed. The more it seems like he's rewarding the more he defies Biden. So there's no real incentive for him to play ball unless he just genuinely believes in the program. A lot of progressives would not agree with that view. They would say, Ruminate, what the hell are you really? You're one of those, lib cucks. You think that the summit, this little pittance of an infrastructure bill is better than nothing? Yeah, I do. And I think he did the responsible thing.
That's the big question. And I agree pretty much with you. I think Biden should have done a little bit more before he decoupled them. But I think ultimately, if Manchin and Sinema really weren't going to budge, you should have just gone for it. And then I think the next strategy should have been taking individual pieces out of Build Back Better and just throwing them up individually. So like,
me? Luke, can you hear me?
1 second.
That was it.
I think we agreed more than I expected, I guess. So you're not like, for example, I had all these quotes expecting you to like defend Vosh, but
no, go ahead, fire them out. Let's talk about them. Go ahead.
Republicans are demons in human flesh. The goal of Republicans,
you want to do it one at a time?
Instance is to just choose the ones you care about. The goal of Republicans in this instance is to maximize the suffering of as many people as possible.
Yes. Well, yes. Hang on. So the Republicans are demons. I think that's a funny quote, and there are a lot of good memes about Mitch McConnell. But no, I think that the leaders of the Republican Party, I think you could make the case that they are malicious, but I don't think that rank and file Republican voters or Mitt Romney are malicious. I think that and I'm blanking on some of the names. I think Matt Gaetz is corruptly malicious. I think Mitch McConnell is. I think that Ted Cruz is as well. Yeah.
Do you think what he said was their goal is to maximize suffering of as many people as possible? That's just
so as far as that specifically.
Dumb. They're just trying to represent a radical base.
Wait a minute. As far as that's concerned, yes, I do. I think, but I not in the way that Vosh thinks. I think that, and we've got. I think actually you in a roundabout way would agree too. Republicans know that the best chance they have to win elections is to make messes or exacerbate messes and blame them on Democrats, which by definition means that their goal is to maximize suffering. Yes.
Not really, but whatever.
Well, no, wait. I mean, and maybe we just, what do you think, I don't think suffering's the goal. I think it's a means to an end.
Yeah, that makes sense. If the lack of good action is technically causing suffering, yeah, actually that's true.
Yeah,
but they're
look,
stay in power.
They fought. Hang on, but I mean examples like the recent baby formula bill in the House. They opposed it. The gas gouging bill. They opposed it. This might sound
dumb, but their goals seem to lead them to acting in a way that maximizes suffering.
Yeah, the maximizing suffering is a means to an end. I don't think that is what. I don't think that's the end point. I think it's like, hey, we need to win elections. What's the best way to do it? Make people as upset and hurt as possible so they'll get pissed off at the guy in charge, who is Biden. Yes.
Fair enough.
It's a means to an end. Go ahead.
The modern Republican Party wants to personally murder every minority that lives within the border of the country.
You repeat that one? Sorry, I was reading Lemon Wedges again.
The modern Republican Party wants to personally murder every minority that lives within the border of the country.
No, I don't agree with that.
So when
I've got family members who are Republican. Yeah.
And then he said they want us all dead. And then after that, he said political violence built on democracy and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So you're saying, wait, they want us all dead. And defensive violence is good and get ready for it. So you are calling people to violence. That's not just saying if anything were to happen. It's saying it already has happened. And their ultimate goal is to eradicate all of us. Come on.
Yeah. So I don't listen. No, I think that was an extremely hyperbolic statement. But I guess being a fan of Destiny and Vosh, people who are considerably less tempered with their speech compared to Pac-Man or Econoboy or you, I assume. I'm kind of used to that. If he meant that literally, and you could make the argument that even if he didn't mean it literally, it was irresponsible to say. I don't agree with that. I have family members who are Republican who do not want to kill and would be appalled at the very notion of it. Now, they might vote in a way that would further that outcome indirectly or whatever. I don't know. But no, I don't think that that's their personal objective. I would say there are very few members of the Republican Party, if any, even in the Senate, that would want that outcome.
Yeah.
I don't think Ted Cruz wants to murder every, whatever. I don't even know if Tucker Carlson does. I just think that, he'd be okay with mass deaths or deportations based on certain ethnic lines. Yeah.
Yeah. So exactly. So
other quotes?
I think it feels like we agree, but maybe you misunderstood my.
No. I thought, like I told you, I thought that,
because we've yet to get to a place where we just have to agree to disagree, which shows me there isn't like a disagreement there.
It's like I told you, even in the first engagement on Twitter, I take you at face value that you're progressive. I even before the thing started, I expected that there was a very real possibility that we would agree far more than we disagreed. My only beef was, and again, I'm so sorry that I did not have the time to refer to it in a clip like I intended to, not as a gotcha moment, but as a good faith full disclosure. This is specifically the thing with which I took issue. But how blasé I felt you were about, Trump gaining more votes despite his litany of failures as a person and a president, and the setbacks, the many, 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 many setbacks that Biden is experiencing as a guy who presents himself as a moderate. I think that is all based out of you, like, watching, and your ears are listening, and it's going in there, and something's going wrong, and then you're coming to a conclusion. Because if you watched my debate with him and came away with, like, Luke doesn't think that the Democratic Party or Biden is having massive setbacks, and humiliated themselves by even allowing a person like Donald Trump to get into office and to get so many votes even when he lost, and maybe it's on my end, and if it is, then that's definitely not my view. But I think the communication is a two-part process. I will fully cop. I will fully cop to. I told you that this was almost like the culmination of conversations I've had with other people, things that I've seen from Destiny, and then, then culminating with your conversation with Vosh. I'll fully cop to that, but I also think that, like, you made it very clear, because you said repeatedly, I'm progressive, I'm progressive, I'm progressive, I'm progressive. And so I took that at face value and never had an issue with that. I think when Vosh pointed out, hey, Donald Trump earned more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016, your response should not have been, yeah, but Biden got more. It should have been, yes, and that's incredibly dangerous, but Biden got more. I think that you should have taken a moment to really pay homage to how terrifying that is, and by implication, how irrationally dangerous the Republican Party is, that they'd vote for this dumbass in greater numbers after 4 years of failure after failure after failure after failure. I don't think it should have been but Biden got more. I think that you should have really been like, even for the sake of common ground, going, okay, bro, listen, I don't think that we're at the point of violence yet, but this is deep shit that we're in. I'm not trying to make light of that, but Biden got more. Instead, you went with Biden got more, and that went right over me. It just crawled over me.
Yeah, and if that's it, then in a situation when someone's making a bunch of points, you kind of have to choose your battles. Sure. And I more wanted to focus on the point that I was making instead of letting him, distract me. Because what happens a lot too is you make points and then some of them are agreeable, so I stop to agree with them, and then you respond to me, not you. A person responds to me. In this case, it would have been Vosh.
Oh, I'm not a person?
And we go,
wow.
and we go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth.
Yeah.
And I completely didn't get to the point that I was trying to make whenever he said something. And so there, it's like, that's a great point. Trump did get more votes. That's horrifying. But that's not what we're talking about. I'm talking about the point that I was making, which was the Republican Party can go too far. He was portraying it like they couldn't go too far. And I'm saying they can go too far and they'll get booted out. Now, they should have gotten booted out a lot harder. But yeah, if it's just that nuance, then of course I'm in the
and so I guess the other thing is too, though, thank you, because again, I don't have the thing handy, and so you elucidated the next part of it, which was, Luke, yeah, I agree with you that Republicans can fail, but that was such a narrow. That was like a movie fight at the end where the villain comes so close to, like the hero walks away injured and wounded even though he's won, because they're gearing up. I guess what I'm saying is I agree with you that if democracy, if elections in the United States are a fair fight, politician to politician, platform to platform, policy to policy, record to record, it's just a fair fight. Just who gets the most votes in the popular vote and who gets the most votes in the Electoral College. I'm with you. I am much more optimistic than Vosh is. And I agree with you that the Republican Party has to be a bit careful about how they approach things because they will lose. But the other part of that is, and Vosh didn't do a good job emphasizing this, that goes back to what large percentages and in some cases decisive majorities of the Republican Party say they want out of their party. And what the Republican Party as an institution is trying to do to rig the stage in their favor the next time it's a close contest. So, yeah, Trump got more, that sucks, but they went too far and they suffered for it at the ballot box. But they're trying to set the stage so that doesn't happen again.
Right.
Not by changing their behavior, but by changing the rules and the terrain.
Yes.
So what do you say to that? Because it could be like Vosh might smugly point out in 2024, hey, Luke, where's the Republican Party going too far now? They've won, and now they've replaced secretaries of state with state assemblies and election officials with their election officials who won't certify votes a certain way. Like, that's a real possibility.
Yep, absolutely. And that's why I talk about the threat to democracy in America all the time. And I think every single thing should be, the kitchen sink should be thrown at it, stopping.
Do you think it's possible? I guess
violence.
What I'm saying is, bluntly speaking, do you think it's possible? You say that the Republican Party can go too far and they will lose as a result.
It's possible that they can change the rules enough where the line that was previously too far won't be too far electorally.
Fair enough. Then we do agree on that. But I guess your conclusion is, and I think ultimately I would agree with you. We're not there yet. I think we're looking at it. We are like, oh shit, it's right here. But I'm with you that we're not seeing that in the rearview mirror. And I think Vosh does.
We're looking at the deterioration of violence, deterioration of democracy. But even if you can see what my next point was based on how I ended that sentence. The way the brain works, even as we watch that happen, the most effective response is not going to be taking up arms unless you're defending directly yourself from violence.
Sure.
It's not going to be a violent overthrow of the government if they're doing this all within the rules. Now
that I agree with, and I want to be very clear. I never contested that specific part, and I know that was ultimately the bulk of what you and Vosh disagreed. I do not and have never contested that. I'm not a gun owner. Vosh's speech didn't persuade me to go out and want to get a gun because I personally clearly don't think that we're there yet. I clearly do not think, as somebody who doesn't own a gun and isn't trying to be a gun owner, I clearly don't think that we're there yet. So I agree. That if defensive violence is ever justified, it's not there. I guess just in the end, I am sympathetic to those who fear that we're there. That doesn't make Vosh right. That doesn't vindicate his position. But I'm like, you know what? I get it. I get why you feel that the Democratic Party is a poor guardian and that you feel that you've got to.
But doesn't it enrage you that they are taking the air out of our, what's the phrase? Balloon.
They're robbing us of momentum. They're robbing the wind from our sails. The exact people you say
you sympathize with are going to be not the reason. Could be a contributing factor to why we can't grab enough power to beat the Republican Party to prevent something like that. They're directly standing. They're not people charging with us towards progress who are just kind of dumb and they're like screaming dumb, slogans while we run in the same direction. They're turned around, jumping at our legs, trying to prevent us from running in the correct direction because I'm going to jump out of that metaphor and just say what I mean. They're not trying. They are effectively preventing people from wanting to be a part of our movement by using that type of rhetoric.
Yeah, well, no, listen, anytime that the left does anything that I think is electorally suboptimal, it bothers me. Listen, if you could right now present me with a document that said it was Word of God, it was the consensus of every relevant political scientist on the planet, and they said, listen, Ruminate, we actually have evidence to indicate that the Democrats are not moderate enough in their rhetoric, that actually if they would moderate more and talk about how great Republicans are and basically, prostrate themselves rhetorically before conservatives and moderates and whatnot, if making fun of Bernie would be the path to guarantee us every victory on the planet, I'm cool with it. I am basically a whore for winning at this point, to be very blunt. Whatever we need to do to win, that's what I believe. And if that means going in the opposite direction, listen, again, we need to talk about how wonderful Mitch McConnell is. I'm cool with it. I would be saying everybody needs to praise Mitch McConnell if that's what would get us victory. So yes, I am frustrated. I guess the thing is, though, I'm sympathetic to the idea of I'm not sympathetic to moderate rhetoric anymore, simply because I don't see it working.
It depends on what you mean by moderate rhetoric.
Sure.
Like portraying yourself as a moderate and saying, my views are very moderate. What are you talking about? I'm a super moderate person. And I also want to do things that are really, really big acts of change. That's awesome. But if you need moderate rhetoric, like trying to characterize the Republican Party as something that it's not, so that you can pretend that they're a good faith actor that you can work with, then yeah, moderate rhetoric is stupid. Oh gosh.
Consensus.
And my camera died again.
I can hear you now.
Every time my camera dies, oh my god, and it never stops on a good angle, does it?
It froze on me too. I look like I'm about 3 seconds away from a heart attack on your screen. I'm telling you guys, that's the AC. I just found out it's like an $800 to $1,000 fix for my roommate. That makes me really sad. I am sadinate. I'm no longer ruminate. I am depressedinate. But
okay, so back? I do think I'm back in my audio, but I think we got to a good conclusion. We'll wrap it up there. Hate to do it without my camera, but it's been a darn pleasure. You are very, very interesting to talk to, and I think we are pretty aligned on most things, and you're fun to talk to. Some people aren't fun to talk to, but you're very fun to talk to.
I appreciate it. Likewise, I'm glad I got to see a bit of Luke Beasley from that commenter in your chat. You were about ready to throw down. Like he had no idea what was coming his way.
Such a stupid thing to say.
It is.